All right. Hello. My name's Rory, and as Stephen was saying there, I write a blog called Creating with Data, and we're a business called InChat. And through the years, I've mostly been self-employed, and as a result of that, I've had to wear many hats and work with lots of different tools, and one of which is D3 or data-driven documents, which I've had a lot of fun working with. And I say I've enjoyed working with it because it's visual. It's quick to get started, particularly in the sense that you don't need to set up an environment. You can just import it. It's just JavaScript, and it uses standard web standards. So you don't need a lot to get going with it. And it's usually described or labeled as a charting library. So if you search online for comparisons of different libraries, visualization toolkits, that sort of thing, D3 is always going to be in there, or almost always going to be in there. And it's no surprise because it's been around for a while. It's been around since 2011. We're on version 7 now. And in those kind of rankings, the kind of listicle type rankings that you get, you'll see that it never clinches top spot because people will write stuff like there's a steep learning curve, or you have to write a lot of code in order to get something out of it. And more or less those are actually fair comments, right? But particularly when you're comparing them to fusion charts and Plotly and all this kind of stuff. But however, if you go back and read the academic paper that the authors published accompanying the release of D3, they actually say this is not a free charts off the shelf kind of deal. What we're trying to create is a document manipulation library that's for graphics that allows you to create data-driven visuals with web standards. So really, you should think of it as being much more similar to other libraries, document manipulation libraries like jQuery, but except there's loads of tools to help you draw things and shapes and SVG elements and all that kind of thing. So in fact, there are charting libraries that are built on top of D3. So actually, in fact, one of the just recently, the authors of D3 released plot.js, it's called plot.js, and that's built on top of D3. And these are great solutions if you want to take some data, throw it at the library, and you quickly generate some graphs using the defaults. And that's great if you wanted to quickly do some quick sort of exploration. You don't need to configure or change the controls too much. Perhaps you're happy with some of the defaults. You can tweak a little bit around the edges, and but you don't need to have fine-grained control of the visuals or the behavior. So if, on the other hand, you want to create something unique visually, or you want to have very custom behavior, then D3 is probably more appropriate. So people have used it for data art, generative art, such as this. I'm showing here this kind of wavy space worm GIF over here, and that's something somebody's made with D3. That said, D3 is of course fine for doing more orthodox stuff like creating bar charts and whatnot. So I felt like it was important to state this up front because of the comparisons with charting libraries. People come to D3 with a set of expectations. They think, wow, look at these amazing things that I can do here. I'm just going to get that for free with a couple of like calls to the library. And they do a few tutorials and get frustrated because the expectations are set in for the library to do something that it's not actually set up to do. So what we're going to do today is explore some of the main features and fundamental concepts underpin D3 for a few examples. And I'd like to share these with you and let you play with the code as we go along. So I'm going to go over to the chat window and I will share that link. In there. And so if you open up the webinar chat, you should see that. And when you open that link, you'll see this page. Creating with D3, and it says using a project, and there's a big button in the middle. And I want you to hit the big button, sorry. And what will happen when you hit that remix on glitch button is you'll probably get a page like this. And you're probably wondering what glitch is. It's an online code editing platform. It's a bit like CodePen if you ever use something like that. And it's really handy because you don't actually need to be signed in to start using the workspace and start editing the code in the project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to glitch. Oh, I'm signed in at the moment. I've got mine in dark mode, so it looks a little bit different. And I'll kind of drive you around, give you a quick tour of glitch, just so you're aware of what's what. So on the left, we have a file navigation pane. So you can choose what you want to edit, and then in the middle here, you'll get your code. And by the way, I should mention, if there are any questions, I will pause throughout the session today to try and take questions. So if you have any, please use the Q&A question and answer feature instead of the chat, as sometimes stuff gets drowned out. Also, in the chat, just raise any suggestions if I need to increase the size. If you find what I'm looking at is a little bit unreadable, do let me know. Anyway, what I was saying there, yeah. So the other thing that's dead handy with glitch is this feature here, which is the preview pane. Now it's probably all getting a little bit squashed, but let me open that up. And the preview pane just basically browses to the files that you have that you have in your editor. And the neat thing about this is that when you make changes in your code, the pane auto refreshes. I see somebody's asked a question. Oh, I see. Okay, so somebody's saying, so Jerry to everyone, link shows an error in Chrome. When clicking the remix button, there was an error starting there. Maybe try to read it. Switch to Firefox. Okay. If you're having trouble with this, don't worry about it. Just follow along. You'll get a little bit more out today if you use glitch and you can edit and stuff, but there's not tons of editing. But I'd like to leave you with this. So anyway, where was it? Where was I? So I was saying that glitch in the preview pane auto reloads, and also if you hit open a new window, then you just get takes opens a browser tab to the file that you're looking at, and glitch autosave, so you can kind of focus on your code. So in this project, a word on the project. The project is entirely static, right? So these are just static HTML, CSS files. There's no backend. These are just served up by glitch. And what we'll do is I've got 7 parts here. We might not get through all of them. We'll just try and get through as many as we can. And then if you like afterwards, you can continue stepping through. And what we'll do is I'm going to open new window on and go to step 1. And we'll start from the beginning. Now, 1.html that we're looking at just here, there's not a lot going on. I've got two SVG elements here, one showing 2 exciting circles, another showing 3 exciting circles. Nothing too wild going on to begin with. And what I'll do is I will step through some of the code that we have for this page. So if I switch back to glitch, what I'm looking at here is the markup for 1.html. So we've got that header that says part 1, start here, a div element with an ID of instruction 1, an SVG element with SVG1 as the ID and another one with SVG2 as an ID. They're both empty to start with. I have a couple of notes. I've got a link to the next step. And then at the bottom here, we've got this script block that's using the module syntax. So it can go and off and import D3 from this remote source from this CDN here. So the very first thing we do with D3 is make a selection. So D3 is all about selecting elements and manipulating them. And that's not limited to graphical stuff. We can do it with HTML. So I've done it to use CSS selectors. So we've got this kind of hash instruction 1. So that's the ID. We append a P tag to the page, and using this attr function, we're setting the style for it and setting some text. So that's where this comes from in the first instance. It's targeting this element and adding that paragraph to it. And similarly, the very first SVG we have here, if you use your element inspector, you can see that we've got 2 circles appended in there, and that is achieved by D3 select and append. So we've actually in this instance we've got a variable that we've called SVG1. So that's just the first SVG element there, and we're calling append. And then we've chained on these methods, these attr methods, and I'll explain a little bit about this kind of style. Often you'll see this kind of style in D3 code, that you've got something and then it'll put stuff on new lines just to help make it readable. But the most important thing to point out about it is, so what these methods do is they set an attribute. The first append, as you saw, that appends, of course, the element to the SVG, and these attr methods set an attribute. So that CX value is the circle's X coordinate that's being set here. And you can chain these on, because what is returned by this attr function, this attribute setting function, is actually just a selection. So you can carry on setting multiple attributes in one go. And we do the other thing. So we've got the second circle. If you're not super familiar with SVG, one thing to note is that the y-axis, or the y-coordinates, go from top to bottom for historical reasons I won't get into. Nothing to do with D3. And the final selection I have here, so I selected all the circles in that SVG element. So we grab both of them and we set the fill color. And I didn't need to look through them, right? I've got this kind of group selection and I can call fill in one go. Now, everything we've done up to now, you could achieve all of this very easily in completely vanilla JavaScript. Maybe you'd have to write a little bit more code, but more or less, you could do that. And there's nothing amazing that D3 is giving us just yet. The second SVG element and the code around that is a little bit more interesting, because it's a data-driven example. And what I'm going to do is switch back to my slides to try and illustrate this in a little bit more detail. So on the left, I have, this is pretty much the same markup and code that was in that first step example. We've got an empty SVG element, and I haven't ran any code yet. And these are we start off with a select call to grab this SVG element, well, which is actually shown here. That's just the markup. And we descend into that and perform a group selection. We try and select all the circle elements. And you'll have noticed, of course, that there aren't any yet, but just hold on to that thought, because that brings me to the third line where things get a little bit more interesting. So we call this data function. And this brings us to one of the kind of key concepts or features of D3, which is called data binding. An idea of data binding is that we've got data that we want to represent visually as elements on the page, or perhaps one or more elements. It could be a group of elements, it doesn't matter. But the idea is we have an object, a value in an array, and we want to represent it somehow on the page. And so what we do is we sort of marry up or pair data with an element or group of elements. So in this case, we're trying to bind data to this group of circles that don't exist yet. Now, we've got three bits of data here. We've got 40, 20, 10, and we've got no circles. So we can handle that condition in D3 parlance. That's called enter. This condition is called entering. We've got the new data entering into the world that we want to represent. So what follows enter here is what we want to do as a result of that condition. So we want to append some circles, and we want to set some attributes. And this is just entirely pretty much the same as what we did before when we weren't bothering doing any data binding, and we were just manipulating the document and being kind of explicit about everything. But this time we've got a few little differences. We are fixing the value of y, and we're fixing the fill value, but the cx value and the r value are driven by the data. So the r value, the radius, is set to the value that's in the array. So the first circle is has a radius of 40, the second of 20, and the second of 10. And that's achieved by passing a function into this attribute setting method. And by default, the very first parameter is the data, and the second is just the index. So the way that this works for the x is I'm saying, the first one will be 0, the second one is 1, and then 2. So we've got 0, 1, 2, add 1, so we'll multiply 1, 2, 3 multiplied by 50. So we've spaced them out a little bit, but they're still a little bit squished together. Okay, this is the point I'd like you to try. If you've got glitch set up and you've got to this point, I'd like you to try making some edits. And I have some suggestions for things to try out or questions to consider. So if you scroll to the bottom of 1.html, this page, and try adding some array values, try changing them, just seeing what happens to this page. Try manipulating some of the attributes so that you can space out the coordinates a little bit. So separate the circles, they're all squished together. And another thing you could try doing is give the circles a thin border of a certain color. And I've got links in here to documentation to help you. Well, if you decide to come back to this, you can look at the documentation and you can explore a little bit further, but also just now, if you want to take a quick look. Now, as I'm doing that, as you're doing that, what I'd like to do is leave you to do that. If you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A just now, and I'll try and answer those while anybody else who doesn't have questions can go off and try playing with this. So I'm going to open the Q&A and take a look.
Hi, Rory. Just while any questions come in, I guess a question for me who's not technical at all. What would be, and apologies if you kind of covered this in the beginning, what would be the benefit of using this as opposed to a more off-the-shelf product like Tableau, for example?
I'll show you So later on, I'll show you a couple of examples. The main benefit is that you have total control over just about all the visuals and all the kind of behavior. But that's also the downside, right? It's also you also have to configure everything then, right? So that's the benefit. However, if you have, so you can completely customize everything, you can completely define everything. So if if you set up something in D3 and you can reuse it and you can reuse your controls, you can reuse some of your visualizations. And it might be that actually you have a bit of overhead, but then after that you can start reusing stuff and you can actually make your life a lot easier. If, say, something in Tableau doesn't quite fit for you, if something in one of these chart libraries doesn't fit, or if you're trying to do something that's a little bit different, bit unique, you will have a really hard time in some of those with those chart libraries. So that's why there's in a second or two I'd like to switch over, and there's some like really arty stuff, but then there are sometimes some things that you can see there's a need for something unique as well.
So yeah, I guess once you've made the initial investment into building your own
Yeah,
workspace, then you kind of hit the ground running.
yeah, pretty much, pretty much. Cool. Okay. We'll give that another 30 seconds or so. As I say, you can come back to these resources if you like.
I've got one question that's just come in there, Rory, in
Oh
case you've
yeah.
not seen it. David Robb is asking, after every edit, does the preview always
Oh
go
yeah,
back
yeah.
to the homepage?
Yeah, that's sorry. This is the pain in the bum thing for with Glitch, and I will I should have mentioned this. So the preview pane, if you open the preview pane and see how it's a kind of addressed at the top to index.html, and if you navigate within it, it will always, when it refreshes it, it brings you back here. So what I recommend you doing is make sure that that's fixed to the page that you're on, and hit this kind of refresh button here. And now that I'm on page, I'm on the part one, and I start making edits, it should refresh and stay on this pane. But yeah, I haven't quite figured it out actually how Glitch is attaching the edits to the pane. But I found that if I address it and then hit that refresh button, and then I can start making my changes. Was there another one? Yeah, okay, cool. I hope that works for you. I think what happens is with the preview is if you navigate within it. So if I hit next, for example, I'm on part 2, but this bit's still addressed at 1. So that you kind of have to, yeah, manage that. Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next step. My goal today, number one goal today, is to get through part 1, 2, and 3. And if we get any beyond any of that, then that's a big bonus. So in that last example, there were 3 array elements, 3 array values, and 0 circles demonstrated circles in the SVG. So we had an empty SVG element. So wanting to consider what would happen if, let's say, I added a single circle element in that markup, pre-styled, and I reran that code that I just had there. So let's scroll down and find out. So in this example, I've added one red circle in the markup before all the code ran. And I reused the same code, that like 40, 20, 10 data binding plus the enter and append. Now, what's going on here? Because the first one doesn't look anything like the other ones. So what D3 has done is it has bound data to all three elements, but our append and our styling, our setting of attributes only happens on that enter condition. And the enter condition only applies for these two elements. So I'll switch over to the code and you look at that again. So this is pretty much what what was showing you in the slides. We've got data 40, 20, 10, and we've got enter, append, and we've got that. Really, what would be nice to do is to make this consistent. So that brings me to kind of the update state, right? So we've got we have an SVG element that we'd like to update in terms of its attributes. Now, what I'd like to say about that is because of this enter and append in the data binding, it means that if I reran this code 50 times over, it would always look the same. It's not going to keep constantly adding elements, right? Because it's completely driven by the data that's there. In order to make this work, so I have that red, which we've started off with the markup where in SVG2, we've got a red circle and that's got its lone red circle. It's the same markup as we have in SVG1. And what I'm doing here, though, to make it update to be more consistent is I've just split it out. So basically, I've got, okay, one difference here. I've got, like, in the code, I've got SVG2 as a selection. I've saved that as a constant. I'm doing my select all, performing the data bind, and appending the circles that need to be appended. And then I've separated out another selection. So select all the circles. So we should have, after this is run, you've got all three, and then you have the attributes being set. So you don't just have to take my word for it about this data binding. What I've done here in this example, I have exposed D3 in the window. So it's not just restricted to this script block. If you open your browser DevTools and you open the console and you type in D3, we've got the whole of D3 to do stuff with. So I can select elements and interrogate them. So for example, if I type in circle, I know that there's multiple circles on the page, but and it will only give me one, and it will just give me the first one, right? So if I open this up and I hit this, it shows me that it's targeting that red one. And the red one doesn't look like we want it to look. But if I call datum on it, I can get the data that's bound to it. And these are CSS selectors, so I can do, I can select like the different ones in all which ways that you want. Okay. My goal is to move on to cover all three steps. So I'm going to go on to part 3. If you want to come back to this and have a look, I've got 2 kind of questions or bonus exercises, but I really would like to cover what happens in under the what's called the exit condition. So we have to consider, we've talked about this kind of mismatch in the number of elements in the array versus the number of elements on the actual page. So let's put it the other way around. So what if we have 5 circles in the markup before we've ran any code, but only 3 array values? What do you think will happen in this case if we reused that update code that we had there? Let's scroll down and find out. So, it looks absolutely correct. However, if we inspect this SVG element, we'll see that we see 3 circles, and that's good. There's only 3 elements in the array, and it's kind of what we want, right? But actually, in here, there's 2 kind of invisible circles that are hanging on. So what's going on there? Well, let me take you back to, I'm going to go back to the code, and here's the markup with the 5 SVG elements. Sorry, 5 circle elements. And here is that update code. And what's going on is we've got data bound to the 3 circles, and we add any that we need to, but we don't need to add any. And then we do an update based on the data that's bound to each element. That's great. So we've got a radius of 40 and a radius of 20, a radius of 10, and then we get a radius of nothing. There is no radius. So that R attribute just gets killed. And if it's undefined, it's just removed from the attribute. So the circle's not removed, but the R value, that radius value, got killed. So it's no longer visible. So that's kind of what we want to achieve, but also not really. It would be better, typically it would be better to remove it entirely. So this brings us to what's called exit, what D3 calls exit. So we can determine what happens when an element no longer has a pair, has data paired with it. So I have in the markup, I've got the same thing again, 5 circle elements, and I've got 2 at the end that are red, that have been styled like that. And the way that that is being determined is pretty much just like the way enter works. I have exit, so I'm deciding what to do in the case that I have circles that are selected, but I don't have data for them. So in this case, we call exit, and then what follows, what should happen if we hit that exit condition. That kind of concludes this part about enter, update, and exit. Well, it doesn't conclude it, actually. I'm going to jump back to my slides and do a little bit of a recap about this. So talked about kind of data and data bindings changing in 3 ways. So we've talked about entering. So this is the idea that we've got data appearing, our data that we want to appear. We've got updating, particularly, it may be that our values change. So if you imagine, you're probably wondering, why is this bit so important? If you imagine a case where you have controls, or you have interactions, or you've got filters. So imagine you've got, show me the data for country A and show me the data for country B, and these are 2 buttons, and we flick between the buttons, and reusing this exact same code. The data for country 1 will be 10, and the data for country 2 will be 15. So that data binding changes, and we use the code to change our visualization, and then you've got the idea of exiting. And this is something that's fundamental to all D3 visualizations. The data binding part is fundamental to all of them. So anything with controls or animation, you will make use of this enter, update, exit pattern. And in fact, I think if you've ever coded in React, this kind of data binding sort of state handling is kind of a similar concept. So I change the data, and then elements begin to appear in this kind of paradigm of development. So this data visualization shows Icelandic population by age, and there's a little slider here that controls the steps through the years, and for each year it shows the population for any given age. So you literally have population entering, and people are born in Iceland, and as they have their birthdays, the bar for a given age is updated, and people are literally exited as they get older and die off at the other end of the visualization. So I felt that was a good metaphor for understanding this enter, update, exit. And it appears in other visualizations too. So this one, I love it. It's caffeine levels by hour. This visualization has changed my directly changed my coffee drinking habits. Like I used to just I don't care what time of day until I started playing with this thing. And effectively what it does is you have some controls to indicate when you drink coffee, and then the graph shows how many milligrams of caffeine stay in your body and for how long. And it will sorry, I've just got a video here, so it's going back up, and then it'll show you, okay, at this point in the day you're going to get a restful sleep. So where is this enter up the exit pattern happening here? Well, it's happening when you make the clicks. We're adding a dose, we're entering a dose of caffeine, and as a result of that, we are representing that as this interesting I guess this would be achieved with an SVG path slope, that area slope that's added here. So there's probably some very unique or very specific or bespoke requirement to code to visualize you have a very bespoke function to visualize the milligrams of caffeine over time. All right, so I've talked about enter, update, and exit, and we've written different bits of code to handle each of these different conditions. You're probably wondering, okay, so I have to write all this code for all this stuff. Well, D3 gives us a handy function called join that handles all the conditions, right? So join covers them all. And to kind of demonstrate what join does in the context of the code that we've been looking at, I've set up a few things here to demonstrate it, right? So I've got a random array function that generates an array of I don't know, like 1 to 10 values. These are just random numbers, and I've got this rerunning on an interval of 2 seconds, right? So I've just set an interval so it goes round and round and round. And it reruns the code. And we are using join to either create circles if we have new data to be bound as elements. It will resize them or reposition them as needed. And I don't think it will actually reposition, but anyway, and it will remove any data that needs to be exited, right? It will remove any circles that are no longer need to represent data in the array. This data binding interrupt to exit concept can be a little bit abstract. So if you have any questions about this, please put them in the Q&A. I can pause and talk about it. I can go back over anything. This is like a big one to get down before we go on to looking at how we can use this in our project. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on. So I talked about joins. Join has a default behavior for enter, update, and exit. But you can, if say you wanted to visualize data that has just entered, you can do so by providing these functions to join. So you provide basically what you'll have is the selection that only applies to the elements that have just entered, and you've got the same idea for the ones that have just updated, and we've got the same one for exit dot remove, which is default anyway. That's default behavior, and so we can kind of customize it. So here, the dark green ones are just only showing when we enter, right? So these are the new ones that are coming in. And D3 does others. You can do other cool stuff like typically you might want to typically just on exit you just remove stuff, but let's throw in a random kind of transition here. So we've got this kind of we changed the Y value to 600, so it looks like it like drops off the page and then it gets removed. So we can do stuff like that. All right. We've got a couple more minutes on to play with that. So if you go to step 4, I've got that code running in the example here, and I've got an example of overriding the join defaults. So in that last example here, we've got several values and 2 of them are red because I have overridden the kind of custom exit behavior. So here's the markup for example 3. Oops, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong one. So this is example 3. And I've got in the markup, I've got 5 circles, and I have in the third example, I've got enter, update, exit. I'll let you play with that. And what you should do is try and change the amount of markup that's there so that green circles start appearing. So try editing that so so that you get, let's say, 3 green circles. And you can do that just using the markup, or you could do it with the code. I don't mind which way. And in the meantime, I'm going to go and answer people's questions in the chat. Okay. So Darren's away. Thank you for coming, Darren. So I will take a look at the Q&A. Oops. The screen is blank. Can't see the markup. Is this screen blank?
I can see your screen, Rory.
Okay. So Terry, I guess to describe where we are at, I don't know if you can rejoin or I'm not really sure how to fix that. But basically, what I'm pointing everyone to is step 4, so 4.html. And if you go down to the heading overriding join defaults, and you look at the very last SVG where there's 3 orange circles and there's 2 red ones. And if you look at the forward.html in the glitch editor, at the bottom you'll see that markup. It's the very last SVG. It's got an ID of SVG3. And what I'd like you to do is just compare what you've got in the markup to what code is at the very bottom of the page, and maybe sort of change it a little bit. Cool. Okay. Right. We got a sense of it. So yeah, the challenge in this is just, can I make some green circles appear by either changing the code or changing the markup? Either way, give that a go. And I can answer any other questions. Okay. I can see your screen. Good. Another question? Let us know. Yeah, let us know how you get on in the chat. If you want to move on to the next step, just let me know. Put that in the chat as well. I'll come back to this.
Rory, there's a couple of questions have come in just now. One from Rory. Well, I think this is maybe a better question for you to read from Jerry. About the update.
Yeah,
activate.
nice. Yeah, absolutely. That's totally totally one way of doing it. You could get it to do that, or the other answer, Jerry, is I don't care. I just want you to make some green circles appear. That's absolutely fine. Update the tribute to green to fill for green on update, or you could just, or one way of doing it, of achieving this, is I think the circles are colored on enter, are they? So you could actually just delete all the markup, and then you'd end up with 3 green circles. So that's another way of doing it. Is there a Python binding for D3 wrapper? I think there is. There's wrappers for a lot of stuff out there, but I haven't used it. I don't know exactly, but I 80% sure there is one out there. So on that note, I would like to jump to the next step. And oh, we've got some more questions, are there? Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. So in that example, in that last example in 4, I was showing you, I didn't really walk through the how I was achieving that set interval thing, and I went quickly walk through it. So I've defined a random array function. I don't really need to go through that. It just comes up with some random values in an array. But what I have here is this redraw function, and inside there, we run that random array, get a random array. We then do our data join using those randomized values, and I've got window.set interval. So that's called every 2 seconds, right? So that's doing that refreshing of the values in this join in motion SVG example right here, right? So I just wanted to quickly run through how that works, because we can use that code to do something very similar with controls. So in part 5, what I'd like you to do is just move the slider a little bit, and you'll see things start to happen. And in here, you'll see we've got a couple of different elements on the page, and this is on this SVG1, which is just empty. If I scroll down to the code here, we begin to see data that's a little bit more like what you would have in the real world, where you have something like, you've got years, and you've got an array of different values, an array of objects, and we want to visualize and compare different things in one go. And our controls let us sort of switch between different representations of the data in some way. So what I'm doing here is, instead of calling redraw on an interval, I'm calling redraw on the input event that's triggered when you move the slider. And I'm figuring out basically the slider just goes from 0 up to 5 or something like that. And I'm just figuring out, I'm adding it up to get a year that I can select in it. And what is being bound here, what I would focus on here is this data and year. So I'm addressing the year that I want to show. And instead of just single numbers, I actually have X, Y, and R values that I can address from the object. So that's what's going on there. I will give you a moment to take a look at that. As I see we're running out of time. So in fact, I would like to give you a minute to look, and then maybe after that, or in the meantime, I can answer some questions. And I don't know, we'll probably need to wrap up, Stephen, soon in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left if anybody has any final questions before we finish. Thanks very much, Rory. I guess just a quick one for me while people are waiting for anything to come in. How long would you say you would, or how long would you give somebody to kind of pick this up to a point where they can use it comfortably? Obviously, that depends on how often they're practicing with it and using it, but average, roughly, what would you say?
That's a really hard one to answer, because it's dependent on if somebody has used it's a little bit dependent. Like if you know if you're broadly familiar with if you're broadly familiar with SVG and HTML and manipulating DOM elements and doing any kind of if you know your SVG well, and you know your markup well, how to use web APIs and that sort of things fairly well. Effectively, this is like perfect for you, because D3 fills in the gap for creating and manipulating documents and SVGs and drawing stuff using data. And you can build on all the skills that you have already to build up, so actually focusing on the fundamental elements that I've been talking about today. If you kind of nail that, then you're kind of unstoppable. But of course, there's like a prerequisite of knowing all this stuff underneath that I've a little bit assumed today. And in fact, what stops people is the knowledge of those other things more than the D3, I find. So if I go over to my some examples here, what's going on here, right? There's there's a nice visualization here of some flowers. It's called film flowers, and the petals here are SVG path shapes. So Shirley Wu's an incredible visualization designer. This is quite arty one, right? But it's like she knows her SVG path very well, and she's able to draw these nice shapes with SVG. And that's nothing to do with D3. D3 can help you do it, write the code for that. But the part that has made this thing is, of course, she's used data from IMDb to use her drawing skills to then render these like nice flowers based on, IMDb rating, votes, and genre. So it's a bit of a tangent of an answer.
I guess it depends, is the answer.
Is the answer. That was a terrible answer. I'm very sorry.
No, not at all, not at all. I think, yeah, you're right though. It's like an add-on to the skills you've already got, you would say.
And that's kind of, it's a wee bit why I focused on that stuff in the beginning, that people say, oh, this is really hard. And it's like, well, it is, but people are coming at it with something else in mind. And I think that's the problem. And actually, when you like reset your expectations a little bit, you can actually begin to create something that's quite unique and whatnot. I guess
kind of relevant, I guess. Jerry's asking, have you got any resources that you'd recommend to continue learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So keep stepping through those steps there. There is a fantastic site called D3 in depth. So I want to get that up to. This is a great resource. I'm going to put this in the chat. So I'll toot my own horn. Of course, there's my blog too. which has some links to video walkthroughs and just examples of me playing around. But D3 in depth is great, is absolutely excellent, and it covers just about everything. And it also the documentation has improved recently. But those are great resources. I've got a few links to the docs. There's one more question, maybe.
I think that is them for the moment. What I would say is that if any of you are looking to continue learning about D3 and you come across any resources that you find useful, if you post them in the data visualization group within the community, then we'll make sure that they kind of get sent around. We send them around in the weekly roundup. So for yourself and anybody else on the call, if you find something useful, please do share it, and then we can kind of spread the knowledge.
And also, I'm kind of trying to develop resources, deliver training, do stuff like that. I'm really trying to get better at this. So hit me up as well. You can find me on the Data Lab community or the usual sort of social media. So yeah, happy to talk through stuff. Give you a hand if you like.
Cool, thanks very much, Rory. And just the last question that's come in from Yizo. We are recording this, and it will be on the Data Labs YouTube, and Rory will also have it as well. So we'll be in touch once the recording is available. So if you need to kind of recap anything, then you can. But I think that's us out of time now. So thanks again, Rory, for going through it. And yeah, as Rory said, if you want to keep in touch, then you can find them on LinkedIn or in the community.
Perfect.
Cheers. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.